Modern.
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 We're prepping for a voyage.
Modern.
The force of an old-fashioned equals whiskey mass times bitters acceleration.
Why don't you make that a double?
Modern BARCART.
What's shaking, cocktail fans? Welcome to episode 199 of the Modern BARCART podcast. I'm your host, Modern BARCART CEO Eric Kozlik. Thanks for joining me for this interview episode where we track down the best and brightest minds in the spirits and cocktail world so that we can share their secrets with you. This time around, I have the pleasure of chatting with Andrew Hellman, part of the husband and wife team behind the BARCART company. They've used their experience in design thinking to elevate at-home spirits infusions to more delicious heights than ever before. But before we break down all the intimate details about at-home bitters, decoctions, and infused spirits, let's take a moment so that you can make yourself a drink. This episode's featured cocktail is the Love Shack. This is a custom infused spirit cocktail designed by the BARCART company to take their chocolate infusion blend and spin it off into a fun tropical application. To make the Love Shack, you'll need 2 ounces of infused rum using BARCART company's chocolate blend. I'd recommend using a fairly neutral white rum for this purpose. 2 ounces of pineapple juice, 1/2 ounce fresh lime juice, and 1/2 ounce simple syrup. After following the directions on your Love Shack cocktail pack and infusing your rum for 5 to 6 hours, combine all ingredients in a cocktail shaker with ice, shake vigorously, and dump without straining into a large rocks glass. Garnish with a pineapple frond and enjoy on the front porch before or after dinner with good company. Couple of details here. The chocolate blend ingredients from the BARCART company include vanilla rooibos, cacao shells, and marigold petals. So this is a chocolate infusion, but it is not merely a chocolate infusion. And you'll understand why when you listen to our tasting during this interview of 2 other infused spirits that I created using their products. It's really fascinating to use them and then taste through them. So we'll do that for you. Also, you'll notice that no one here is assuming you have access to crushed ice, since the drink is designed to be shaken and then dumped. The higher dilution here, accompanying that maneuver, accounts for the greater levels of sugar with both pineapple juice and simple syrup. So, if you suspect it might come out a little sweet for your personal palate, simply dial back one or both of those ingredients and you'll be sipping pretty in the sun. So, now that you've got yourself a drink infused with an intriguing blend of teas and botanicals from around the world, let's turn our attention back to the interview. In this fascinating conversation with Andrew Hellman of the BARCART company, some of the topics we discuss include what an infusion is at a technical level and why you might consume more of them in your day-to-day life than perhaps you realize. How, with the help of his wife Anna, Andrew used his experience in finance and design to launch a new company aimed at changing the way we think about infused spirits. The painstaking design that went into BARCART company's infusion hardware and consumable packets, from the Scandinavian aesthetics to the insanely easy infusion process. Andrew's approach to sourcing ingredients and creating flavor accords to pair with specific cocktail formats. We answer a timely listener question about scaling a homemade bitters recipe into something perhaps more commercially viable. We cover the merits of curated music playlists, the woes of sourcing lavender, what to drink with a grandma straight out of the Mad Men era of the 1950s, and much, much more. I'm super excited that this is episode 199 because it anticipates a big new step for us by getting back to our roots. After all, Modern BARCART started as a humble cocktail bitters company, and what I appreciate most about what Andrew brings to the table is his incredibly scrupulous eye for detail and design. You don't realize how many assumptions you make and expectations you have in the cocktail space until you really step back and examine each phase of a simple process like infusing a spirit. That's what Andrew and his team have done. That's why I really enjoyed using their products to prepare for this interview. And if you're in the market for a cocktail gift or a fun way to impress your friends at your next get-together, then I'm sure you'll enjoy using them as well. With that, I'm pleased to present this wide-ranging conversation with Andrew Hellman, co-founder of the One Part Company. Andrew, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Eric. Pleased to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So to kick us off here, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners, tell us who you are and what you do.
Sure. My name's Andrew Hellman. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the One Part Company. And I'm actually, if we cast our eyes back into the midst of time, started my career in finance, coincidentally over in Europe. Worked out of London for UBS for a number of years, right when the common currency, so the euro, was being launched, which I'm afraid dates me, but that's just the truth of it. And the thing that became important for that, just very quickly, was that was a real time for kind of strategic thinking, because a lot of things was changing or were changing at the time. And so that was something that was really kind of drilled into me, was not just seeing the finite challenge in front of you, but the bigger picture and how a movement here has a knock-on effect there. And that's something that I've kind of carried through my professional life and was very much a part of us doing what we've achieved so far with the One Part Company. And it's a company we launched back in 2017, along with my business partner and wife, Anna.
Awesome. So it seems like in addition to some of the finance work you've done, you also have a bit of a background in design, or at least design thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. So we launched our design company, Terraforma, back in 2006. Over the years, we've done a lot of work in the kind of cocktail hour, bar, home bar, that kind of category for people like Pottery Barn, Williams-Sonoma, Crate and Barrel. And really what that did was that created this mindset for our company that really focuses on the product achieving a specific result for a consumer in the home. And so that's been, and I think as I look back, has been incredibly important in shaping our mindset when it came time for us to kind of introduce what we're doing with our cocktail infusions under the One Part co-brand. Simply because cocktail is so often seen as a beverage category. And one of the things that I think makes us a bit unique is that we always look at things from the efficiency, from the process, from ultimately the success of a user making use of a product that we've put in their hands.
Exactly. And it doesn't surprise me when you drop those names, Crate and Barrel, Pottery Barn. It very much is geared toward the home bartender, as opposed to some of our other guests who tend to be more industry focused, whether they're distillers or they're people who are in the beverage and hospitality industry at bars or hotels. So one thing that really struck me about your product, and we'll talk about Infusion here in just a second, but I think this is important to get out there right now, is I think so many products that are marketed toward home bartenders and home cocktail enthusiasts are really dumbed down. They're not really design driven. They're sort of shtick driven, or I guess event driven. So like, a margarita this for Cinco de Mayo or something like that. That they're not designed for repeated use over and over. They don't really allow the home bartender to get anything out of it besides a very set product. And I think what comes along with that is the impulse to almost talk down to home bartenders. I see this profusion of these cocktails, they call them systems right now, that are coming out, where it's basically the Keurig or the K-Cup of cocktails. And it's like, you either put your glass down on this mat and you punch something in somewhere, and some set of robotics and AI creates a cocktail so that your fragile little mind doesn't have to think so hard. And what I like about the One Part Company is that it seems like you really do embrace that thinking, and your products are generative in that they spur ideas. So we'll talk about what that looks like and how that sort of rolls out and scales as somebody uses this product. But that's why I was immediately attracted to it, because it does seem it's playing in the same space as a lot of those products out there, many of which you may find at a Crate and Barrel or a Pottery Barn. But there's something different about this. There's something exciting, and it really does allow you to celebrate the ingredients and really engage with what you're doing, as opposed to, pressing a button and having some robot somewhere put out a very middling to pour cocktail on your behalf. So that's what kind of made me want to reach out to you. And
Yeah.
So I guess, we're talking about infusions here. One part is, all about taking a spirit and then adding something to it. So I thought we might begin our conversation at the technical level by talking about what an infusion is at a very basic level. Can you talk about how you think about infusions?
Yeah, sure. Infusion is a physical / chemical process. Like if we get scientific for just a second, um, it's a physical / chemical process where plant material is put in the presence of a solvent, usually water, and allowed without further agitation to pass its flavor into that solvent, that water. In our case, we're doing that with plant matter into room temperature spirits. Um, it's an incredibly robust process. It happens all the time around you during the course of your normal day. So, for instance, I mean, this won't be very appetizing, but after a rainstorm, if you see a puddle of leaves, they're infusing their flavor into that rainwater. I would not recommend drinking it, but that's absolutely what's happening. The more common kind of household occurrences of infusion as an umbrella category would be tea, which is tea or coffee, right? Would be the classic examples of home infusion. Um, there are technically subsets of an infused process that use either stewing in hot water, which would be tea, it's decoction, again, if we're being scientific, or percolation, which we all know is one way of brewing coffee. But again, all you're doing is you're taking plant material and putting it in the presence of a liquid and somehow agitating it to get a quicker transfer of that flavor. The interesting thing about alcohol as a solvent instead of water is that alcohol is a caustic. It's not technically an acid or conversely a base, so its pH level is rather stable, but it's highly caustic, which means it agitates, it accelerates that transfer. So our infusions really were dialed in for pretty much your kind of standard, quote, 80 proof bottle of spirits or, volume of spirits. And so we're really just porting that process and people's innate familiarity with this idea of, oh, I've got a flavory thing here and I've got some stuff I want to flavor there. I'm going to pull them together, wait a little bit of time or watch a process happen. And at the end of it, strain off that newly infused flavored, liquid and keep that for my ongoing use. Most cases, you're combining it with sugar and cream and having tea or coffee. In our case, what you've done is imbued that spirit in a small batch way on demand for your use to then use for much, much more simplified cocktail builds. So going back to your earlier point, which I found very interesting and could not agree more with the way you expressed it, is the notion that people are very clever and very quickly figure out exactly how they want to use or misuse an ingredient layer or a process layer to achieve the result they have in mind. You see this happening and developing almost rambunctiously in the kind of meal kit side, right? With HelloFresh, with Blue Apron, with all those guys who said, right, we understand what a microwave meal is, and we also understand that's not very appetizing for people. And I would say that is the direct kind of correlation to what you were saying before about some of the Keurig, K-Cup, that kind of approach, just push the button and get the cocktail. What that does is it sidesteps and minimizes the importance and the value of the ritual, of being involved in creation. I want to be able to say, I made you this cocktail, even if it was quite easy for me because I used infusion to my advantage. I want to be able to say, hey, I made this, not I pushed this button for you, or I poured this out of a can for you. It doesn't have the same kind of romance to it. And there's an emotional aspect to products, absolutely, that become very important for people's rituals. And ritual doesn't need to mean by extension an overly elaborate or prolonged process. Rituals can be very quick, right? But they're important touchstones that connect us emotionally to something that we're going to be intentional about, invest a little bit of our time in, and enjoy a result from. And all we're doing is providing people with a more highly refined, albeit completely natural botanical tool to help them achieve an elevated result with minimum demand on their background in terms of expertise or specific skill set.
Right. And I think there's something about ritual that, if not associated with quality as like a quantitative, like high quality versus low quality, is at least qualitative in that you're going for a very specific outcome. Otherwise, you wouldn't do the ritual.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I agree. And I think, when we were developing our infusions, which, are simply combinations of herbs, spices, florals, botanicals, and teas, pre-measured out, and in our case, developed to be a certain, what we call a targeted cut size. So when we develop our infusion blends, they average 4.8 ingredients per blend. Now, obviously, you have to do it to a round number, right? But that's the average across our 19 different blends. We use 54 different ingredients, and each one is about 5 ingredients. But the notion was to be able to deliver to people an infusion process that most infusion, when you enter that in reference to cocktail on the internet and start your search and try to figure out what's going on, people speak in terms of days, if not weeks, right? We knew from our product background that there is nothing that can be considered truly a product that is measured in days or weeks. There's an immediacy, even if it's not instant. There's still this notion of, hey, if I think about maybe at lunchtime, I want to having some people over, I want to put a little menu together, have some cocktails and go. I felt like we needed to be able to deliver on the promise of that person should be able to engage with our product, put together an infusion, and within an afternoon, at the end of that afternoon, have the infused spirit ready to roll into their simplified cocktails.
Right. And it's no different than marinating a steak that you're going to be having for dinner.
Very analogous. That's a great
the
analogy.
effort.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So I love your definition of infusion. I don't think I have too much to add, although there have been a few more recent developments in terms of using things like sonication, to like literal sound waves to infuse things more quickly. But if you strip away some of those more high tech and lab driven approaches to infusion, then yeah, really we are sitting there at the level of leaves in a puddle, tea leaves in a cup of steaming water. And your physical solution is also one of the compelling parts of the one part company, because not only do you have these packets that are pre-cut to a specific size, right? You're optimizing for that, as you just explained, the time expenditure needed to go from blank canvas to the painted infused canvas, if we're talking about a spirit as a blank canvas, perhaps. But there's also what you have created as a device. We have a couple different ways we can do this, of course, and I'd like you to talk us through first the 375 ml infusion cylinder with the suspended botanical basket, and then the other solution that you created for folks who might want to roll something out maybe about twice as large as that.
Yeah. So one of the things that we kind of considered in development was this notion of, yes, we're porting in a centuries-old process simply to apply it in a semi-way to a new category, right, and to achieve a kind of new result for people in the market. But we wanted to make sure that we were giving people the option to kind of think of it as, hey, I'm engaging or adopting a new process. I'm just starting out. I've never done this before, even though, of course, they made tea and coffee. For this category, they're doing something new to them. And, based on our past experience in product design, when you do stuff that's new, you have to think not just twice, but three times as much on behalf of the consumer to support what is natural hesitancy and skepticism. I've never done this before. That's new behavior. Asking people to develop new behaviors, the most challenging thing in product design. So one of the things we felt we could do was simply give them an initial measurement or a standard measurement that wouldn't take up a full bottle of spirits in case they felt like, hey, that's a lot to commit, something I've never done before. Or B, even more likely, allow them to activate a previously open bottle of spirits that they may just already have on hand, So the 375, to make the measurements consistent, to make the timing consistent, no matter which blend or which spirit you're infusing, that was a huge part of, I believe, what we've achieved with what we were doing. We've created a level of standardization for the infusion process that I can confidently say never existed before. All of the infusions are done within 2 to 6 hours, period. All of our infusions will always be, even the ones that we haven't developed yet, will always fit into that performance parameter. And so that notion of consistency, right, of a behavior that people can learn once and then repeat with confidence, that really was what guided that. And then in terms of the way that the infusion products kind of connect to each other, you referenced our infusion bottle, which is literally a cylinder that holds it's a 500 mil volume in total. But when the little infusion basket, which holds the infusion material suspended at the top of the liquid column, when that's in place and the material is in there, it holds exactly 375 mil, which is great because then you're not sitting there asking the consumer to measure things, which I personally have always found tedious, and unless I'm following a really specific recipe, tend to disregard anyway. So this notion of objects created under one heading or one brand should acknowledge the fact that they're members of the same family. That to me is just part of the rules of good product design. And so that's something we built in to our solution here.
I love your 375 ml infusion bottle because to me, it really is a beautiful marriage of form and function. You talked about the sort of the both, I guess, but one of the things that you didn't mention was the beauty of it. It's sort of Scandinavian in look and feel. It's got the glass with a sort of a wooden looking screw top, and not only that, but it also there's also either the outer wall of the glass is thick enough or it's double walled, such that you can see the liquid column as being sort of separate from the bottle itself. So there's a little bit of space that shows like, okay, here's the container and then here's the liquid in that container. And as we'll talk about in a moment here, when we taste some of these infusions, that allows you to really watch and engage with some of the cool processes that are happening as the alcohol or the spirits and the ingredients intermingle. So I really like the beauty of it. I think the design is not only efficient, the basket fits in perfectly. I didn't have to figure anything out about it. I just it couldn't be simpler to use. So from a function perspective, it's fantastic, but it's also beautiful. So I think there's something to be said about that as well.
No, that's great, and I appreciate the kind words. Yeah, we come to that stuff very honestly. I mean, as I mentioned before, my business partner and wife Anna, she's actually Swedish. I'm half Swedish. My dad is an immigrant, so we kind of arrive at that aesthetic honestly. But it really comes from a philosophy about design, that if you're going to make something useful, don't hesitate to make it beautiful. And I think that for us, design is really when we know something's finished as a design process or a design exercise on our side, it really should look discovered, not designed. There's an elemental simplicity, I believe, to nobody wants to know what Andrew Hellman specifically thinks about how a vessel or glass or packaging or whatever should look. My job and our team's job is to arrive at a kind of super normal middle ground between what the consumer might value or have in mind and what we feel proud to identify as our work. And we've just found over time that it's the kind of knocking the edges off and revealing the essence of the idea as opposed to being very contrived about something, which kind of circles back to your comments about like the cocktail machines that are out there. Those kind of remind me of like the Death Star, and it's like this ultimately contrived thing. And I think there's a real innate beauty and simplicity in this process of infusion and in cocktail when it's done really well. And we wanted that to be part of the basis for the consumer's experience. And so it was very much part of our intention to pass that, not just the structure, but the feeling that it engenders along of empowerment, of accessibility, of ultimately of mastery. People feel, it's transparent. To your point, you can see what's going on. It gives people a sense of control, which rightly they should have.
Mm-hmm. And it's the sort of thing where I mean, perhaps you might not recommend this, but it is the sort of thing where I could see taking out that little infuser botanical basket, sticking that in the sink or wherever I'm going to find it when I get back home. But, just grabbing that bottle, taking out the botanicals when it's done infusing and hitting the road with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like I can see sticking it in a backpack.
It's so funny, our and I'm not going to dwell too much on this, but our sales strategy is constantly evolving with the product as we find legitimately new channels for it to be relevant into. And one of the ones is we've been chatting with one of the big kind of outdoor gear camping type publications that's very interested in the application of this for elevated cocktails that you can pack in light. And because there's minimal reliance on additional ingredients, you're coming out clean. There's leave no trace, that type of mentality. And I really love that idea, even in an at-home process of something so simple, something so directly engineered to do what it's meant to do, that it leaves no trace. I think that's a beautiful way to think about what can be the over complexity of the cocktail category. And whether you're sticking it, to your point, in your on the go or your backpack or whatever, or you're simply being reasonable about how much space in my kitchen do I actually want to dedicate to making a great drink. The suggestion, I think, from the craft cocktail movement is roughly 4 times your normal kitchen cabinet volume. But I think realistically, people again want that elevated result. They just don't want all the remnants of things. So that clean simplicity, light footprint, easy, accessible, empowering thing was absolutely, those are the different facets we were driving after with this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to hit a couple things really quickly. I want to hit the 750 ml bottle solution in case you come across folks who might want to infuse a full bottle of spirit. I want to talk about the QR code use, because I think there's a really handy set of little extras and add-ons that come with each of these packs that I'd love for you to hit. And then I want to get into some nitty-gritty stuff. We have a listener question that I'd love your help answering. And I want to talk just more generally about your approach to sourcing some of these ingredients, because some of the combos you put together are awesome. So why don't you take us through 750 mLs and the QR code and all of that, that entails, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. So the 750, basically, if you think of infusion as there's a before. So in the process, you're thinking, okay, I want these type of cocktails. And we've launched our cocktail packs, which make it even easier than it was when we originally launched the product range, when we were selling single infusion blends on their own. So buy the floral infusion, buy the cinnamon infusion, buy the chocolate infusion, whatever. And what we did during COVID was really kind of take that extra step, because COVID for us provided a unique opportunity to take the prior 2 years of market experience and to re-optimize the product and to look at it in this forced kind of at home. The consumer wasn't able to get out and do the normal things they do. How could we make it even easier for them to pick which one they want? So for each, I mean, if we think that any cocktail or any spirit can basically, there can be permutations of an old fashioned, a sour, and a daiquiri, right? Roll citrus or sweet forward, that kind of thing, and you get different outcomes. We have 19 or let's say 15 blends specifically designed for spirits, times 5 spirits with a few exceptions, but for round numbers, that's 75 infused spirit permutations times 3, right? The old fashioned or the straight slight modification, daiquiri sour, that's 3 cocktails per. You're talking about 235 cocktails like that. And that, that may not be a cocktail you can go back to the Savoy or the Old Waldorf or any of those kind of formative cocktail books and say, oh yes, I'm making that. But in terms of construction of flavor and enjoyability, they knock the cover off the ball. And so being able to put those into packs and merchandise them, that was the thing that we really kind of took away from COVID. And so now when you hit our website, you're looking at 30, depending on the time of year, because there's seasonality. We have some classics that are always there, and then some season specific offerings that we do. But people can pick from 25 to 35 different cocktail packs, and a little infusion comes with it, along with the QR code that you're referencing. I'll circle back to your question on the 750, but for the QR code, the big thing there was just really thinking about the cocktail as a 360-degree experience for people. During lockdown, the absence wasn't necessarily the drink. The absence was the experience of enjoying the drink in a bar. And a bar is multi-sensory. A good bar is a multi-sensory experience. Absolutely. It's visual, it's auditory, right? It even to some extent there's scent and things like that go on in it. And so the QR technology, which for people who don't know, QR is just a collection of pixels that typically is constructed for native scan by any smartphone application, any smartphone. So iOS does it, Android does it, all of them do it. All you got to do is hold your camera up to the QR code embedded on the back of one of our cocktail packs, and it launches what we refer to as our cocktail hubs. And they're specific to the cocktail. They first and foremost give you the recipe. So no more hunting around for cocktail books. Where did I leave that recipe? Did I bookmark that thing I found online? It's all right there on demand for you immediately. The second thing is a quick reference guide to infusion. Maybe it's been a little while since you did your last one. Shame on you. You should be doing them all the time. But in case you didn't, it's just a nice little reassuring quick read thing that reminds you, if you have the infusion vessel, you use it, and that's great. If you don't, it tells you how to do it without. And then, links to things like Spotify Cocktail Hour playlists. We had a lot of fun putting those together. They're constantly evolving. And even a route back to a quiz that we've launched on our site that allows people to match some kind of abstract preferences or things about their personality or what spirits or what mood they're in, almost like a bartender would ask you, that allows us to formulate a recommendation of which cocktail is right for you in the moment. So a lot going on with the QR code. That's really been a great opportunity to use kind of emergent technology in a completely new way. And so going back, just kind of extending that principle of dialing in the right thing for people in the right moment. You referenced initially our 375 ml infusion bottle, and that's great for that half batch. If you wanted to do a full infusion bottle, you've got kind of 2 choices with this. You can either do 2 packets, which mathematically is correct. So infusion is a function of time and volume. That's really it. Volume of the infusion material, volume of the liquid. And so anytime you're altering those things, you're going to have to toggle another one. So if you want to keep the time the same, you can double the volume, you double the infusion packets that you use. So 2 packets for a 750. Otherwise, you could think of it as maybe, this is a particularly strong infusion, right? Maybe I'm the kind of cocktail drinker at home. I like a little bit of weaker flavor just generally. That's my preference. I don't like a more robust presentation. Then use one packet, right? So again, this is meant to be a tool for the consumer to quickly understand because it's easy, and then to feel a level of mastery. And I love nothing more as a product designer than to see people creatively, quote, misuse a product. That's the consumer extending utility. That's the biggest compliment you can get as a product designer. So I say, look, we're going to give you an on the rails experience. We're going to tell you how, quote, it should be done. And at the same moment, I want you to feel empowered to do it entirely your way.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. So the nice thing is, the liquor is generally sold, and the most popular size is going to be your 750 ml. So it's one of those situations where you can simply, even in the absence of the 375 ml infuser cylinder that we were talking about earlier, there's nothing preventing you from just simply putting the packets straight into the full bottle of spirits and then using something like a coffee filter or cheesecloth or a nut milk
100%.
bag
Yep.
to just get that out. And I mean, anybody who
I love the
has
big Pyrex things. Like when we've done larger like event service and things like that, we've been lucky enough to do things with like the American Diabetes Foundation, with Cipriani, with Live Nation. We've done quite a bit of service level type events. And when we've got to do big quantity or in-service quantity, we'll get out the Lexi buckets. We'll do the big, Pyrex measuring cups are great. The only thing to keep in mind is there is an innate sugar level in any spirit, right? That's essential for fermentation, distillation, all that stuff. So we always recommend using a lidded container if at all available. But honestly, go back to that puddle and leaf example we talked about. It's a robust process. I mean, the English in the 17th century were literally creating bathtub gin. That is nothing more than spirit infused with the range of gin kind of spices and florals. So yeah, take advantage of that. Be flexible with the way you want to approach it. Again, we're a tool to accomplish an end, not a prescriptive push the button, it can only happen this way type thing.
Yeah. So I think the logical place to go right now is to taste a couple of the infusions. I got to work last night and then again this morning, and we had some back and forth before this interview about maybe what we wanted to feature. And I think we arrived on featuring the ginger and then the smoke infusions. And it seems like you have some backstory to talk a little bit about why those infusions might be particularly compelling or difficult to achieve, and how you really nailed ginger and how you really nailed smoke. So I'm going to start with the ginger, since that's probably going to be the least intense. And I'll let you just talk me through this. I infused it. I had precisely half a bottle of Catoctin Creek Roundstone Rye whiskey. I know that you guys recommended Irish whiskey, but this is what was on hand, and I think it was just perfect. So I'm going to pour myself a little taste here, and why don't you walk me through that?
Sure. So the ginger is a very, very it's one of the only. It's actually the only single ingredient blend that we do. That said, there are two ingredients to it. One is ginger, one is elderflower. Ginger is an incredibly peppery flavor, quite powerful. The challenge that gets created with that is ginger is an incredibly popular flavor, but it's the question of how do you actually make use of that in your cocktailing. And kind of going and buying fresh ginger, that can be incredibly variable because you are, you're at the mercy of the growing season. Is it towards the beginning? It may be a little bit weaker. Is it way towards the end? Maybe very mature. So the other side of it is you're typically having to do a lot of shaving and chopping, etc. So it can be a very problematic ingredient to work with. And bartenders, when they're called on to you, first of all, it's very rare that you see ginger used frequently in cocktailing. You see it with ginger ale, but I don't even really think of that as kind of an ingredient usage. That's more of a mixer usage. But the notion is that you can bring this beautiful, peppery kind of natural flavor intensity to, as you mentioned, we recommend our ginger sour is recommended for an Irish whiskey. A rye is a very good comparable to that, simply because it shares the absence of that really soft, sugary bourbon base. It's a little bit more delicate. I'd even say almost a brittle type of flavor that matches incredibly well with that pepperiness of the ginger. Mm. I can see you've taken a sip. How'd we do?
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I'll be honest. There's, when you said, when you were talking about ginger earlier, I was thinking like, one of the things that's comparable is, you said it's a popular flavor. Oh, I like ginger. That's like saying, oh, I like spicy food. It's like, great. Are we talking like sriracha here, or are we talking like 5 Alarm, chopping up the ghost peppers type situation? Both of those people say the same thing. I like spicy food, but they mean two different things. And so it's ginger is in that place where it's a little bit challenging to figure out exactly the right usage for it. Now, we use fresh ginger in a lot of our cocktail bitters. Actually, I would say more of our 8 flavors than not contain fresh ginger. And it's one of the slight ironies of ginger as an infusion product or ingredient that I've noticed is that fresh ginger is actually much gentler in spirits infusion than the dried ginger. And there's some chemical reasons for that I'm sure are documented somewhere. And I'm sure I don't have the scientific literacy to interpret those, but your use of the dried ginger here is intense enough, and it hits the right chemisthetic aspects of flavor experience for me, in that when you take a sip, it kind of races to the back of your tongue. You get a little pepperiness up front, but then it kind of races to the back of your palate and warms as the spirit goes down your throat.
Definitely.
It contributes to that. And I think that's why when somebody enjoys something in the buck or the mule category, that's the exciting part of that drink. It's not an exciting drink without the ginger. It's just a watered down sour without the ginger. It's a sugared up, watered down sour. But when you put that ginger in the buck, it really plays off the sugar, and it really activates and the like I said, the chemisthesis of the ginger really plays interestingly with the acid in that cocktail format to make it super exciting, even though it is relatively simple to make. This episode is brought to you by Near Country Provisions. If you're like me, here are some things you might be like. You live in the Mid-Atlantic. You enjoy meat. You highly prefer that your meat is local, sustainable, and comes from ethically raised animals. And you'd absolutely love for someone to deliver it to your door once a month. If this sounds like you, then you need Near Country Provisions in your life. Head over to nearcountry.com and check out their different, highly customizable meat delivery packages, and also browse their growing seafood selection. As a thank you for being a Modern BARCART listener, you can get 2 free pounds of ground beef or bacon included in your first order after subscribing if you enter the code BARCART, all one word, at checkout. That's BARCART, BARCART, at checkout. Near Country Provisions is the real deal, and I can honestly say that I'd recommend them even if they weren't a sponsor. The meat and the local farmers they work with are just that good. Now, back to the show. Talk about your decision to put elderflower in this infusion. Why that?
So, elderflower, for those who don't know, is a slightly naturally sweet botanical. So it literally is a flower. And it has, the liquid version of it that people may be most familiar with would be a Saint Germain. That's a core elderflower kind of presentation. And to me, actually, elderflower has a cloying sweetness to it that actually on its own can be, like, I don't know many people who reach for elderflower or reach for Saint Germain on ice. right? That's typically mixed in very small. It's kind of like a Suze type thing, right? It's a quixotic type flavor. You want a de minimis amount of it. It's that little, ooh, what's that, at the back end of the flavor profile. And so, because exactly to your point, you're 100% right that there's this intensity that's derived from the dried version of ginger. We saw the need and frankly the opportunity to create this kind of counterbalancing flavor note, and felt that the exactly what we felt was problematic about elderflower on its own, when brought in with such a polar opposite as that peppery power of ginger, what we actually found was the two flavors kind of come towards the middle of the palate. So it knocks some of the fire out of the dried ginger, but still leaves this kind of, it likes to play nicely with other flavors, balanced presentation of the flavor overall, which we felt was important. But I think this ginger is an interesting one here, and it kind of, we spoke earlier about this notion of the benefits of repetitive and consistent process. So the infusions all go off in 2 to 6 hours. It's always one packet to 375 mil, et cetera, and people can learn and become comfortable with that. That also extends into the cocktail construction. So the pack that we sent you, I believe, was either the ginger margarita or the ginger sour. I think it was the ginger sour, because you're referencing the Irish whiskey.
Yep.
And that cocktail construction in our terminology is ginger infused whiskey, lemon juice, simple syrup. You're done. The same infusion, swapping out the whiskey for Blanco tequila. So you've got your ginger infused tequila at literally the same measurement levels. You're doing ginger infused tequila, lime juice, and agave, and you have a ginger margarita. Our construction of it anyway, and that may come down to a personal dislike for triple sec or anything in that family kind of gets to me. So we go kind of a cleaner construction for that. But the point I'm making is that once that person at home who may be entirely new to cocktail and looking for our product to help them simplify their whole approach to the category, once they've learned that construction, it's highly portable. A Gimlet is an incredibly similar construction, So this notion of repetition, this notion of consistency, of this almost boomerang revisiting of things you've learned before that you can now use in the same way to create a different and new and exciting effect. That's incredibly important to what we want to help communicate to the consumer at home.
Well, and that's why I love this product for beginners, because that is exactly what you should be doing if you're just starting to learn about cocktails, is to learn the basic constructions, learn the old fashioned, learn the sour, learn the Negroni, right? Like these are, and once you do that, then you can start complexifying. Then you can start understanding them in perhaps a more granular way. But that's why I like this as a learning device for people who are just starting out. So I think that really maps on. Let's talk about the smoke blend now, and then we've got our listener question that we should answer.
Cool. Yeah. So I believe you infuse that. You infuse that into what?
It's a Blanco tequila. Yep.
Okay. Great. So yeah, this in product design, you have eureka moments along the way, right? Because it's a blind path. I've always kind of thought of it as like finding yourself at the front of a race. How fast do you have to run to stay at the front? You don't know. And so this notion of you get little check-ins from your creative instincts along the way that give you this sense of, ooh, I think we're on to something here. And this was definitely one of those. So what we wanted to do was to create this sense of smoke, but without the kind of contrivance of the smoking chambers or anything like that, to give it a little bit more portability, something a little bit more organic, and frankly, a little bit more durable, that actually had to do with taste, not just the connection between scent and flavor, which is really what the smoke machines are doing. And so what this is basically a deconstructed Earl Grey, turbocharged with Lapsang Souchong, which in China colloquially is known as old man tea. And when you look at this blend, it's a stack of black teas. So it's Ceylon black tea, which is the quintessential kind of subcontinent black tea, already powerful and kind of has an innate smoke quality to it. Then there's bergamot, which is an ethereal kind of citrusy presence. And we reinforce that smoke flavor to kind of kick the bergamot into the background so it becomes very much essence as opposed to flavor. And that the smoke of the Lapsang really dominates the presentation. And the final thing is this kind of quizzical touch of cornflower petal, which has this beautiful blue kind of hue to it. That's really it. And I can see you've had a quick taste. What are your thoughts?
Super complex for sure. And the bottle that I picked up, I made sure was in both of these cases, since I knew we were going to be discussing these, both were bottles that I was familiar with, that I couldn't pull it out in a blind tasting because that has been demonstrated to be very unreliable, but certainly that something I'm familiar with. So this was just a Milagro Silver or a Milagro Blanco, their base expression. It's a darn good tequila, but it's nothing special. Something that I always feel comfortable mixing with. So one smart thing I think about is the Lapsang Souchong, is that smoked? Is that actively smoked in process? So you've got some actual smoke in here, and then you are also supplementing with ingredients that do smoke or smoke adjacent moves. And I think that's really nice. You're obviously going for a complex blend here, and really what this ends up tasting like, and this is a 2-hour infusion. I actually only infused for about an hour because when I came out and checked on it, I was like, oh, that's quite dark. I'm very certain we've got a lot of flavor in here. I'm not going to risk over infusing, because if you've ever over steeped a tea bag and then gotten tea that tastes like sandpaper because there's so many tannins in there, you don't want to do that. So I took mine out after only an hour in the infusion cylinder, the 375, and it tastes the natural analog. The place where my brain wants to go is Scotch, of course, or perhaps Mezcal, because Mezcal is definitely the smoky cousin to tequila. But
but without that medicinal kick at the end, right?
Yeah,
it's definitely the initial kind of flavor presentation is very mezcal-y, but it doesn't have that. I've always felt like mezcal, to me, with a few exceptions, is almost like the perfect song with one wrong chord in it, and it's a great spirit. Don't get me wrong. I've got a couple different types of mezcal at home. Love it, drink it neat. It's great. But what this is, it can be a challenging flavor for people. And so this has kind of all the good and none of that offset with that medicinal kind of Band-Aid-y flavor at the end, like the mezcal will have.
Yeah, it's interesting because I want to compare this to like somewhere, like if there was a triangle between Highland, Speyside, and Mezcal in terms of two different types of Scotch. You get the smoke from the Highlands, you get some of it does have a little nice hint of sweetness on there. Maybe that's from the cornflower, maybe it's from some of the teas. Then the bergamot, yeah. So and some of the Speyside has some of those fruitier notes in it as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I see this as kind of falling in the middle of those three different types of spirits. And yeah, I mean, I think that's the point of an infusion. You're taking something and you're turning it into something else. If you wanted a Speyside, go get a Speyside. If you wanted a Highland, go get a Highland. If you wanted a Mezcal, go get that. But no, what we're doing here is we're taking Blanco tequila, obviously and ostensibly something to mix cocktails with rather than to enjoy neat, and then using other ingredients to turn it into something that it is not, and something even different from those other three categories that we spoke about in comparison. So I think in that respect, it really is a remarkable achievement in infusion. It couldn't have been easier. I mean, I didn't have to think while doing any of these. And I say that as a compliment when I normally don't mean it as a compliment, because I like to think about it. But the outcome is just so wonderful here. How do you think more generally about creating what we might call flavor accords, something that a gin distiller might think about, or a perfumer might think about, of taking multiple ingredients and using them together to create, like you were speaking about a moment ago, a chord with different notes becoming greater than the sum of their parts. Maybe you can walk us through another example from your products as a way of illustrating that.
Sure. I think again, kind of, you have to consider the mindset that's natural for us, which is always the product design. What is the outcome? How does it, quote, fit in the hand of the consumer? And what result can it achieve for them? So as opposed to, say, someone who's more deeply embedded in, maybe running a farm, or they're closer to the ingredient layer, we see flavor as a tool to achieve a result. And therefore, we kind of think backwards almost. We start with what we want to put in the hand of the consumer, and then we may have certain notes that we want to make sure are in there. Some of them may be because, hey, when we market this concept, I want to be able to present this image. That ingredient has to be in there, right? Or it may come up as a technical thing, right? I mentioned this notion of kind of the technical balancing between ginger on its own, which in my estimation, dried ginger for infusion would probably be too powerful. So we counterbalance with elderflower, which is nowhere near ginger in terms of flavor. It's kind of an out of left field inclusion. And what we found is that that's really the art to what we do. There is no prescription for that. Where it becomes a bit prescriptive, and where we've had to develop a deeper technical understanding and techniques to kind of suit, is the fact that flavor stacking is really about your primary, your overt flavor. You're immediately supporting flavors. So as an example, I'll take one of our most popular infusions, and it's one you could probably close your eyes and guess accurately right away, is our citrus infusion, which is lemongrass, lemon verbena, ginger, right? So there's an element of ginger in there, which is way in the background because it's powerful, right? As we've talked about. The lemongrass has the earthiness. The lemon verbena has this kind of punch in the middle. And so the interesting thing is, the one thing we don't have in that citrus, that lemon forward flavor, is actual lemon zest. And why is that? That's because when I say words like citrus or floral or chocolate, what I'm doing is creating an expectation. In design, you call it a supernormal expectation. It's an undefined generic apprehension or understanding that the consumer is likely to have. And the goal is designing towards that, so that even though they can't really express it, what they're getting is that balance of that flavor. The last thing you want, if you say, yes, I want citrus or lemon, the last thing you want is just lemon zest. Way too powerful. It's crazy. You can't do that. So it's all about finding ways, and it's a lot of trial and error. There are 5 different commercial types of cinnamon, for instance, right? Mm-hmm. We had to land on one that was properly and consistently sourceable. That can be a challenge because these are natural ingredients. That's world commodities market stuff. So
you're preaching to the choir, I promise.
Yeah. No, I know you know. But instead of coming out of Sumatra, that year it may have to come out of Sri Lanka or. And so getting something that's going to be consistent and available, but then going through the trial and error and communicating with our blending partners as well, saying the type of sweet offset, in the case of like our cinnamon infusion, that was going to be an incredibly fast, our only 1 hour infusion. And what we came to was that the sweet offset for that infusion, kind of like the equivalent for the elderflower that we do in that ginger blend, had too much of a kind of flat note to it. We wanted something that was more rounded. And what we ended up doing was including elements of apple and orange. So this kind of tree fruit sweetness, right? And those flavors take 5 hours to emerge. So the cinnamon in our cinnamon infusion is pretty much at full volume within 90 minutes. It thankfully doesn't continue to exponentially grow like tea, like you were speaking about before, and quite accurately about the notion of oversteeping with black teas, where for that smoky infusion, we say literally 2 hours and no more. But for the cinnamon, it kind of plateaus, and then it gives that extra few hours, gives time for that tree fruit sweetness to come up behind it. And can you taste apple or orange? Maybe if you've got a really dialed in palate. But more likely what you're getting is this, again, super normal kind of satisfaction for that idea that you have in your head of a given flavor. So long answer, short question, but it's very much, and I know you're way dialed into this, but there's a basis of science, but then it's all the art, you know?
I love it. I love it. Well, and especially because cinnamon and apple and orange, cinnamon apple, cinnamon orange, these are all, pairings that we encounter so often in the culinary space, So,
Absolutely.
so it's easy to overlook the individual flavors simply by that fact that they are paired so often, so that I think that I like the concept of the supernormal expectation. I think it's something I'll have to marinate on a little bit because, I've obviously been dealing with other people's supernormal flavor expectations for many years now, but I don't know that I've treated them as such. It's really, really dialed in design thinking way to approach it. But I wanted to turn our attention now to our listener, Gene. You may hear a little bit of clicking on my mic because I need to go over to Gene's email. I'm going to this is 2 emails because I needed more information from him. So Gene said, been a listener to your podcast for the past year or so and heard you mention a few times that when you increased your bitter production volume, you needed to adjust the recipes by increasing the flavoring ingredient. I'm crafting a few flavors at home, going from a 16-ounce batch to a 5-gallon batch. Any suggestion on what % I need to increase my flavors? Realize it's not an absolute science, but looking for some guidance. Thanks in advance, Gene. So that was his initial question. We'll get to like percentage of increase in a second because there's a bit of a flaw that's a bit of a flawed idea, but it's right in principle. So what I asked him for, I said, listen, you got to get us a little bit more on your ingredients and the proof that you're infusing at, and roughly how long, and just if you're going to be doing other things like sweetening your bitters or adding any other ingredients in there. So basically, what we're looking at here is we're looking at extracting at 80 proof. So we're not doing a super high proof extraction and then proofing down. We're not sweetening. And the ingredients here, this is like a lavender or lavender adjacent flavor. So some of the things that he listed as ingredients were lavender buds, gentian, and burdock, which are the 2 bittering agents in this respect. We've got juniper, coriander, Moroccan mint green tea, lemongrass, chamomile flowers, and black pepper powder. The last thing I will note is that for this formula, I was considering increasing the flavor ingredients lavender and mint green tea as I scale from 16-ounce to the 5-gallon batch. Let me know if there's anything else. Greatly appreciated, Gene. So knowing that we've got somebody who's trying to go up from like a mason jar size batch of these lavender bitters to a 5-gallon, think like a glass carboy for home brewing. What and any initial thoughts on that?
I mean, obviously, I'll put it in the context of our own experience doing larger infusions in service. Immediately there are a couple of ingredients in there that jumped out at me as potentially challenging when you talk about like mismatching of intensity. And so the black pepper would be initially something that you would think you'd need to watch incredibly closely. My sense is that would probably be one of the easier ingredients to deal with. I was looking more at things like chamomile, which can start to get that can quickly move out of being a secondary flavor into a primary flavor very quickly. So I'd very much watch that, and I think the notion of the mint element can also be a challenge. The Moroccan mint is a good call. anything peppermint or any of those more kind of, we think of them almost as like medicinal or dental type mints, can become unwieldy. I think also because they're not technically black teas, right? That's a botanical, but they have that over infusability property to them, where it starts to get intense and then intense and dull. It's a weird combination, right? So those would be the ones, and I think the idea of the lavender, of course, I'd be interested to know how is that being done with natural ingredients, or is that being done with extracts or stuff like that? Because I think that the lavender also, that's one that we've seen can fluctuate wildly in intensity.
Yeah, I agree with that. The lavender was the first place where I wanted to go with this in terms of making recommendations. Now, Gene, what you may have heard about scaling ingredients, I think you translated that to dialing certain things up in intensity, and assuming that certain things don't scale when you move to a larger batch size. That may very well be the case in some instances, but what I found more often when scaling an infusion like this is that some things actually scale more aggressively at a larger batch size. So my problem child in that was the allspice in our tiki bitters. We had allspice at a certain quantity, and when we scaled that linearly to the 5 gallon or the larger batch size, and we use liters so that we can stay in the metric system and keep things easy for my very fragile brain and math abilities. But yeah, the allspice, which was at a perfect level at the mason jar size test batch, when we scaled that, just blew everything else out of the water. So some things, what I would caution against, and I think chamomile is a smart one, lemongrass is also another situation where, depending on what type of how you're doing your lemongrass. Now, you can get fresh lemongrass. To me, dried lemongrass has almost like this fruit loopy quality, and when you let that take over, like as a background note, really nice, plays really well with lavender. But as soon as you let that lemongrass step out in front, perhaps by infusing in a larger size and scaling that linearly, I say that lemongrass might be something that you'll need to back down. Also with lavender, one of the things that I've learned is that there are multiple grades. So if you go on a website like Mountain Rose or perhaps Star West Botanicals, you'll see with the better wholesale spice purveyors, they will have different grades. They'll have, regular lavender, extra maybe, and then there's super grade. The way to get a better lavender flavor is to always go with the highest grade that you can afford, organic if possible. And then also, the one hack I've learned, because we encountered some variability in our lavender bitters, and so I was calling our ingredient providers and saying, hey, listen, I'm experiencing these fluctuations, any reason why? And they're like, oh, well, each lot number has, so imagine you're a lavender field in wherever they source this lavender from. A lot number is what you ship in bulk to these people who then repackage and resell that product. So each lot number has with it some sort of quality number that we don't get told. And that quality number with lavender has to do with the buds to leaves and stem ratio. So really what you're doing when you're infusing lavender is you're infusing some lavender buds, but also some unknown quantity of leaves and stems. Your ability to control the amount of leaves and stems in that infusion is going to be the difference between a really clean, pure lavender flavor and something that's perhaps a little bit more vegetal and more bitter. So my recommendation overall is don't think so much about needing to scale up that lavender or scale up that green tea more than you would if you were just linearly scaling it. I would worry about the other things, like you mentioned, the chamomile, potentially the lemongrass, that might be more aggressive with longer time in the infusion. And then also as a rider on that, the more you can do to really latch on to quality by doing a couple of those hacks that I just mentioned with the lavender is going to pay really good dividends down the road. And if you do that, the better quality you use, the less you need to use to get that good flavor. So those were my thoughts. I don't know if you have any follow-ups.
Yeah, the only thing I'm thinking is, as you're speaking, one of the things that I was just kind of gut checking myself on is, if I was doing that kind of a large scale up, how would I approach it? And I'm not even sure it's something where you'd get two formulations at the end, your small and your large. I wonder if there are not a couple in between, because that's a pretty big scale up that he's talking about. It's almost like, yes, the linear scale up might give you an indication, right? Of, yeah, theoretically, I should end up about here. But I think mindset wise, you may almost want to approach it as a related but somewhat separate development, because that's a big increase.
It really is. And it's one of the, again, like you said, it's all science, but the science is so non-complementary to an actual product development mindset that you almost have to throw it out the window and think of your ingredients more like notes or more like characters in a story, right? How are they relating to one another? It's not so much about, is this going to scale? Is this not going to scale? It's at a larger scale, how are these things going to relate to one another? So one thing I can't tell you, Gene, is what your burdock and your gentian are going to do over a long period of time and in a larger vessel. Are you going to be agitating this vessel at all? There's also some process involved there as well. So yeah, it's a complicated question. Please do feel free to follow up. Gene, we've got our email thread. So if you have any follow-ups after hearing this, please let me know. But yeah, I think that was a really fun little use case to take some of the knowledge that we've been talking about and actually apply it to something that one of our listeners is dealing with right now.
Yeah, definitely.
So
and good luck, Gene.
Yeah. We'd love to taste them too. So if you want to send us any. Last question here before we wrap up the main section is what's on the horizon? We just got through a big kind of iterative phase for you, it seems like, with the pandemic and rolling out the QR codes and some of the evolving use cases for the infusions. But what's on the horizon for you?
So we've got we're really proud of this. We've been one of the kind of go-to-market things for us that's really important, and also based on our experience with kind of introducing true kind of innovation to the product landscape, is always about scale validation. Who do people already know that they can trust, that say, hey, one part is legit, one part is something you should be involved in? And so we've been working with Diageo for a number of months now about an upcoming program we're going to be doing with 3 of their spirit brands on shelf, where we've created packs that slip over the neck of the bottle and kind of present, basically it's an on-bottle version of our cocktail packs. And those are going to be going through some of the big grocery chains out on the West Coast. So people like Albertsons, Safeway, Fry's, Total Wine. So we're really excited about that, because not only is that scale validation, right, where these are very recognized. If I said them, you'd know them immediately. I can't, because it's, they don't want us talking too much about it before it goes live in September. But this idea that you've got these highly recognizable, almost definitional spirits brands whispering back at the consumer saying, hey, not only are we playing in this new kind of innovative, fun at-home space, but equally one part's the partner that we feel is the match for our quality and our commitment to your experience. So that's just something we're very proud of. That's the result of an absolutely epic amount of work for our team. So super excited about that. So stay tuned there. And then really more kind of like zooming out, like where are we taking this? I really love the idea of using the cocktail packs and the infusion simplicity to enable the home consumer to not just enjoy easy bar quality cocktails in their home environment, but to do so as a way to connect to different cocktail cultures around the world, right? So whether that's kind of the Shinjuku type thing from Tokyo with like the little stall bars that they have with like 3 stools and like a cocktail wizard making up individual, like tap into a bit of their flavor profiles with things like yuzu and basil and some of these really cool, exotic, fun things. Mm-hmm. But take the kind of formal, traditional approach like that in Japan, and you juxtapose that with maybe we spend some time down with some bartenders on the beach bars in Rio. Or we've actually formed a bit of a fun online relationship with some aquatic farmers based out of Iceland who are dealing with botanical ingredients that they're actually growing at depth in the ocean. So it's to me, I feel like the thing that, and you'll I think be on the same wavelength, is there's so much to express and so much to explore when you think about cocktail not just as a liquid but as an experience. And how do we help the consumer tap into and simplify a product that may have previously mystified them, but also compress distances to bring something that's vibrant and really popping and happening. Like the Mexico City bar scene right now is crazy. It's incredible. Some of the coolest stuff I've ever seen is coming out of the bars there. So how could we tap into that? How could we bring that into what we're presenting to consumers in this market? And then we're going to be doing, like, on the slightly more mundane side, hitting the funding markets a bit later in the summer as well, just to make sure that our arsenal is fully loaded for the next kind of batch of innovation that we've got lined up. So full plate, or full glass, I guess you'd say. Yeah, that's what we got going on.
It sounds like it. No rest for the weary, but that's all super exciting developments to be able to share with us. So best of luck with your Diageo rollout, and I won't push too hard. I don't want any Diageo thugs knocking on my door with a baseball bat. But yeah, I'm sure I can imagine some brands in the back of my head that you might be working with, and those are precisely the types of brands that I would use your product with. So it seems a natural fit. There's a price point fit there, and a recognition fit there. So
it's exciting. Thank you.
Well, that's great. Do you have time for a couple quick lightning round questions?
Love it. Yes, that'd be great.
All right. First one. What's your favorite cocktail of all time? And
Negroni.
If you don't have one, Negroni.
Yeah.
No hesitation.
None whatsoever.
Right.
In my mind, it is the perfect cocktail. I mean, and I'll keep to the lightning round format here, but if you go back to the kind of just pre-prohibition cocktail books that really form the basis for the entire craft cocktail movement. Yeah. I mean, my father actually ran the Waldorf Astoria for a number of years. And so I kind of have always grown up in the hotel environment. He ran other hotels, but he was there for about 10 years. And the old Waldorf book was something that I came across when I was there. And I was young. I was in my early teens when he was there. But it always just fascinated me, that kind of stuff. And you go through there, and I'm telling you, over 3/4 of the recipes in that book are gin based. It is the quintessential cocktail spirit to me. Mm-hmm. It infuses beautifully as well. And you've got this cool base with the botanical side where you get a lot of that fruit and floral richness. Even you go up to like a Bar Hill or something like that with like the honeycomb type presence. All the way over to the super dry London. You got a huge range of experience with it. It's just it's a great cocktail, and you can have endless arguments about the proper kind of formulations or percentages for the cocktail as well.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. What's a seemingly small or idiosyncratic occurrence that always makes your day?
Okay, so we've been talking a lot about like analog reality, so I'm going to flip over to digital for a second. I just recently, and maybe I'm telling you something that everybody's known for like 5 years, but I've been starting to use like the Sonos alarms as a way to start playing certain stations at certain times of day. So, just during the pandemic, there's been a lot of like, this notion of I'm trapped. I want to experience this. So I've started streaming things from like, like the radio station on Martha's Vineyard, or one in like Rocky Top in Tennessee, or, out in Marfa, Texas, like these hyper local radio stations. But I've kind of timed it so it kind of follows me around during the day. And I've just found it really cool. It's like having your own personal theme track. It's kind of your soundtrack. It's cool.
That's fantastic, especially paired with all of the playlist design that you've done. So, yeah, absolutely. I love it. Cocktail with anyone in the world, past or present, who would it be? Where would you go? What would you drink? Just paint us a picture.
Sure. Okay, so this is going to get an initial from the listeners, but it'd be my maternal grandmother. And the reason for this is she passed away when I was kind of, relatively young, so I didn't get to know her too well, but a very kind of artsy type person. But importantly, she wrote copy for ad agencies in New York City in the 50s. And she loved cocktails. Her cocktail was a Gimlet. And one of the cocktails that work with our infusions really well is what we call our garden gimlet. It's our floral infusion into gin. And so I think she'd just be tickled that we put this much effort into making a great drink. And I'd just love to hear her references back to kind of that formative Mad Men, ad agency in New York with women in white gloves on Fifth Avenue. That whole vibe. I think it'd be a really cool kind of juxtaposition. And she knew how to drink a drink. So I think she'd be just a lot of fun anyway.
Very particular moment for the cocktail. I love it. Last one here. Do you have any unusual or controversial opinions in the spirits and cocktail space?
Yeah, I think the big one, and I've referenced a couple of them. I mean, this notion of I view cocktail less as beverage item and more as almost kind of lifestyle experience, if you had to put it into a category at this time, because it really is at its most limited definition. It's about putting liquid ingredients in a glass, right? But it's much more, as we've been talking about, right? The provenance of things, the process of things, how accessible, enjoyable, empowering is a certain cocktail or a moment, and really giving the customer that sense of ease, right? That same grandmother, I can hear her voice. She lived in Savannah in the later part of her life, and she was from the South and had a bit of a Southern accent. And I remember her saying, welcoming people into her home with, "Oh, and what can I fix you to drink?" That kind of just that gentility of that question. Not this, I'm going to disappear into the kitchen for 4 hours before I get my smoker out and my nitrogen and, all this stuff. Just that gentility and ease. And I think, extending beyond that, I think cocktail should be and needs to be less about faithful recreation of classic formulas and more about inspired personalization. Because I think everybody's palate is the only one they have. And so matching up to what others describe or tell you is correct, I don't have much time for that. And I kind of think of the cocktail industry a bit like late era, like progressive rock, like ELO or Yes. And I feel like what we're doing is a little bit more Sex Pistols. It's you need 3 ingredients and a bit of energy. You don't need orgeat. You don't need all this contrivance. Just really good ingredients constructed simply and get out of the way. Drink it, and if you want it different next time, make it a little different next time.
Yeah, I love it. I love the music comparison. Well, Andrew, this has been a hell of a conversation. I think my big takeaway is that this is the proof in the pudding, right? The proof in the pudding is not only in the glasses here that we sampled through. It's through all the really thoughtful details that you and your team have dealt with to come out on the other side with something exactly like you just mentioned, simple, but really full of energy. So thank you for taking this time to walk through this with me, and just give us the quick digital contact info for you and your team so we know where to learn more about One Part Company and how to purchase your product. Absolutely.
Well, first off, Eric, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's we think long and deep about this stuff, and sometimes it's just always great to get to talk to somebody who shares that passion and has also equally put in so much of the effort to kind of express their perspective on how to make a better drink. It's really what it's all about. So really appreciate it. We're easy to find. We're at onepartco.com. Our socials are all One Part Co. And, I should say One Part actually just came from this belief that, every great cocktail starts with 1 part infusion. That's really where the name comes from. So One Part Co will get you everywhere. I'm at Andrew at onepartco.com. If anyone has any follow-up questions, obviously either over to Eric or you can always feel free to reach out to me directly. And I think, We're excited to see where this adventure takes us. And the most exciting thing to me is I'm not quite sure yet. I know what we've done, but what we have yet to do next, that's the exciting part. So I think it's a big cheers from us. And again, my thanks for having me on today.
All right. Well, Andrew, hopefully we'll have opportunity for a part 2 in the future. But for now, thanks for being a guest, and cheers to you.
Cheers, buddy.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, there's 2 big things you can do for us here at Modern BARCART. One would be to tell your friends and family if you think they'd enjoy listening to us talk about cocktails. And if they don't download podcasts, they can always stream our episodes on their desktop directly from the show notes page at modernbarcart.com. The other thing you can do to help would be to head on over to iTunes or wherever you download your podcasts and leave us a review. 5 stars are great, but we're more interested in your feedback. And the beauty is, the more reviews we have, the easier it will be for other folks out there to learn about our show. We're trying to start a cocktail revolution here, and by spreading the word, you're helping us fight the good fight. You can always reach us by emailing podcast@modernbarcart.com if you're looking for cocktail or bartending advice, or if you're a pro who would like to pull up a mic and be interviewed for all to hear. Also, definitely follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Modern BARCART for cocktail porn, recipes, and entertaining tips. And keep an eye out for new product releases and special offers, which are happening all the time. We love our listeners, and we really enjoy giving you exclusive discounts and sneak peeks at our latest and greatest cocktail projects. This episode may be over, but for you, the mixological fun and adventures are just beginning. So remember, folks, drink responsibly and experiment boldly. This episode was made possible with editing and sound design by Samantha Reed, spirits infusion advice courtesy of Andrew Hellman and the One Part Company, and a little bit of interview magic by yours truly. This has been a Modern BARCART production, copyright 2021.